Welcome to all of you to Pint of Science 2022. This is the second night. That's it? That's how excited you are. So this is the planet Earth, and today we are talking about biological invaders, and their conquest has begun. I'm the host for you tonight. My name is Shri, and I'll be hosting this with
Brandon Mark, and together we are PhD students from King's College London Geography. Right, before we begin, a bit of housekeeping. Everyone, point to me where the exit is. In case of fire, go down one floor and get out the building. Windows, maybe not the best. Toilets are in the basement, and food and drinks can be ordered on the ground floor. Because the show has already started, no pizzas will be delivered upstairs. Boo, you're late. That's on you. But don't worry, because we have a break at 8:25. 8:25, and that's when you get the second chance to order your food and drinks.
Are you really here for only the food and drinks? I hope not. But who else has attended the Pint of Science other than me before? That's it? Okay. Well, to all of those who have been here, welcome back. And to all of those who have not been here, I'll tell you a bit about Pint of Science now. So right now, the Pint of Science talks are going on in more than 25 countries. And there are more than 300 events happening just across UK. This event today is a bit significant, more significant than all the previous events or for all the previous years that we have had, because it is the 10th edition of Pint of Science this year. The Pint of Science aim, which most of you guys have probably figured out, is to make science accessible and enjoyable to the public. I can't tell whether it would be enjoyable for you or not already. You guys can tell me. You guys can tell me about that later. But it's also about academics. We get the academics to the local pubs and share research with you whilst you guys drink. We guys are already drunk, and the academics are also drinking with you. So tonight we have the exciting topic of alien invasions.
So first, tell me, who has encountered aliens before? Anyone? Oh, yeah, one in the audience there. So for most of us, our experience with aliens comes from fictional alien activity exemplified by Hollywood. These are often foreign, non-human beings from a different time, a different place, and they are often here to wreak havoc on Earth. They threaten humanity. These techniques that they employ often makes our skin crawl. We've seen the face huggers from Alien. They reproduce through your face. We've seen shape-shifting T-1000 Terminators drop in from a different place, different time, blend in among one of us, and get rid of all of us one by one. But newsflash, aliens actually already live among us. And you have all already experienced it at some point in your life. Any show of hands? Anyone come across an alien? Any guesses what they may be? Yep. Zebra mussels? You? Mussels? Yeah? Gray squirrels? More aliens? Prickly pear? Yeah. My favorite, the parakeets. But I'm not going to spoil it for you. I'll let the speakers tell you more about aliens tonight. And we'd like to bring out how often fantasy is not too far-fetched from reality.
So let's stop this fantasizing about what aliens are and stuff, and let's go ahead with the talks for tonight. So in the first half, we have two talks, and this is where we'll be trying to find out what the invasive species are, how they work, and what are their strategies for taking root in the new environments. We have a short break after that, and then from the break, we then shift gears from focusing on the differences between the aliens and the natives, which is us, which is, again, a big question there. But we will start questioning ourselves on the societal impacts of these discriminations between the alien and the native, and even if how these discriminations work. You will have a chance to ask questions to our speakers after every event, after every talk, and at the end of the event as well. So if you have questions and if we don't get you, or you don't get to answer that question, you don't get to question that question during the first round of question answer session, don't worry. The speakers will be here during the break and after the event. And we promise the speakers won't kill you unlike the aliens. We also have a competition, which most of you already know about, which is alien drawing. So get your pens and papers in front of the table, draw your aliens however you assume them to be, and we have 2 prizes. One, for the funniest one, and second, for the coolest or the scariest one.
What's the prizes, Chewie?
Where is it? Where is it? Where is it?
Pint glass, Pint of Science pint glass. So first up, we have Josh. Josh is a postdoc research associate with King's College London. He's very, very, very friendly with invasive species, right, Josh? He'll be sharing his work today on freshwater mussels as part of his PhD. I'm not sure about you, but are you guys a fan of seafood? Shui, are you a fan of seafood? Who likes seafood in here? Yeah. 10% chance that after tonight's talk, you wouldn't be as much a fan anymore. And as Josh speaks, I'd like you to think how the face huggers from Alien by Ridley Scott. How are they similar in strategies to the mussels that Josh is going to highlight today? Come right up, Josh.
Cool, thanks everyone. Thank you so much for coming. As Brandon said, my name's Josh. I'm a PhD student, not a PhD student, I'm a postdoc now Still getting used to that transition. Working on plant invasions at King's College London, but because Maria, talking later, is going to have plants well covered, instead I'll tell you about some of my PhD work on freshwater mussels. So I think everybody's pretty familiar with what we mean by a biological invader. They're basically an organism that established somewhere they really shouldn't be. And I think we all know they can have a massive negative influence. It seems like everyone in the UK knows about Japanese knotweed. That's the one that comes up again and again. But there's heaps of invasive species spreading around, having really negative influences. Another one is like the malaria mosquito, which is spreading throughout the US, spreading malaria throughout the American continent. However, what I want to tell you about today is that invasive species can also have a more subtle influence. They have an influence in ways that you wouldn't normally expect. And they do this through influencing host parasite networks. And by talking about freshwater mussels and their parasites, I'm going to show you a couple of ways in which this works. So I'll tell you a whole lot of facts throughout this talk. I don't expect you to remember all of them, but I would like you to have these 3 key takeaways. First is that freshwater mussels are really, really important. Second is that parasitism is actually really, really important as an ecological force. And the third thing is that invasive species have a really negative influence on both these previous 2 things. How will I do this? I'll give you a bit of very brief background on freshwater mussels, and then I'll show you how invasive species affect freshwater mussel recruitment, reproduction, and broader ecosystem function, and how all of this is mediated through how these invasive species influence host-parasite relationships. So first of all, to answer the question which seems always to come up, can you eat a freshwater mussel? Technically, yes. You can eat anything once. Should you eat a freshwater mussel? The answer is probably not. And the reason you shouldn't is because it links really closely to why they're so important. So this is the River Cam. I took this picture last summer. This is probably my favourite fact about freshwater mussels. The entire volume of the River Cam is filtered through freshwater mussels every 2 weeks. So these mussels are incredibly prodigious filter feeders. They take up all the sediment, all the particles that are in the water, and basically clean the river and end up with these nice clean rivers throughout the UK like this. Just as a comparison, this is a tributary of the River Cam taken on the same day that doesn't have freshwater mussels, and that's what that looks like. So you can see the influence that freshwater mussels have in cleaning the environment. They do this through filtering particles through their gills and basically depositing them in the riverbed. This example's with oysters, but I'm sure maybe people have seen this picture before. That just gives you a really nice visual of how these bivalves clean the water, basically clear all the crap out of it. Mussels are really important in other ways too. For example, they prevent erosion. They form these big mussel beds in the sediment that sort of anchors all the mud together, prevents the banks from collapsing in. If you don't have freshwater mussels, you can often end up with riverbanks and lake beds looking like this, which is not what we want. So that's why mussels are important. How do invasive species affect this? So the first thing I'm going to tell you about is mussel recruitment. So by mussel recruitment, I mean of the babies that freshwater mussels produce, how many of them are actually added to the freshwater mussel population in the next generation. And to do this, I need to tell you that freshwater mussels are actually parasites themselves. So this is the inside of a freshwater mussel. And what mother mussels do is they actually brood their babies in their gills for a while. So you can see these are their gills in here. And so when they're ready to have babies, they basically fill their gills with freshwater mussel babies. So you can see this is a non-gravid gill with no babies inside. And then when you have freshwater mussel babies, the gills become really swollen, basically full of these babies, which are called glaucidia. This is what they look like under a microscope, basically just like little mussels. And what you might be able to tell, you probably can't really see, is that they have little hooks on both ends of the shell. And the reason they have hooks is they are parasites of freshwater fish. So these little baby mussels will latch on to the gills, latch on to the fins of freshwater fish, suck the blood of the fish, or suck the hemolymph of the fish, and grow and get nutrition in that way. So you might ask, how do these baby mussels attach to the fish in the first place? Now it looks in this case like this freshwater mussel has somehow managed to grab a fish. That's not true. That's actually all muscle tissue. So that's a big extension of the mussel's mantle. It just looks like a fish. And so then other predatory fish come along, try and eat that fish that's sitting there. That then erupts in their face and sprays them with freshwater mussels, babies basically. And that's how the mussels get attached. There are some other examples of lures. So these are mainly North American mussels. They're incredibly sophisticated. They attract these predatory fish, and then when the fish try and eat them, they basically explode babies into their face. Something else cool happens with the European mussels. So this is another way that they can do them. So this was some work I was involved in. This is a mussel in Poland, an endangered mussel called Uniocrassus. And what you can see is what it's done here is it's crawled up to the riverbed, right to the edge. It's poked itself out of the water, and then it's spurting these jets of water back into the water. And if you look closely, those jets of water actually contain its babies. Those little white dots are its little mussel babies. And by doing this, the pattering on the water then attracts freshwater fish again. They come to see what the pattering is, and because they come to see what the pattering is, they then get infected with these freshwater mussel babies. And that's what they look like when they're attached to the fish. So you can see the gills there on the left and the fin on the right. And these freshwater mussel babies will stay there for a period of months, eventually become big enough to drop off the fish and become adult mussels again. So that's the whole life cycle of a freshwater mussel, basically. Attaches to a fish, stays there for a while, drops off and becomes an adult again. So you might say, what's the problem here? This seems to be a sort of a weird system, but how could invasive species affect this? The problem for freshwater mussels is that not all species of fish are good for them. And normally this isn't a problem, because in any given river system, there'll be lots of species of fish which are good for freshwater mussels, but there might be some that aren't. Maybe these fish have a strong immune system, so the freshwater mussel babies can't survive. Maybe they just move around too much and shake them off. And the mussel has to sort of take this chance. It can't really, guess, or it can't control what fish it will infect. It's just sort of got a hope that most of its babies will attach to fish that it can use. And this isn't the problem normally, because there's lots of fish that it can use. What we're seeing is that invasive fish species are spreading throughout freshwater rivers and lakes, especially through boat traffic, recreational fisheries, things like this. And this is introducing a whole lot of invasive species which aren't good for freshwater mussels. And these invasive fish, they're outcompeting the native fish, and this is producing a pool of possible fish which is mainly composed of fish that the mussels can't use. So this reduces the success of freshwater mussels because most of their babies are now dying instead of attaching to good fish that it can use. So that's one way that freshwater mussels are sort of impacted by invasive species in a way which you might not expect. Another way is through reproduction, so the production of babies in the first place. So I showed you this photo on the right before, and what that red arrow is pointing at there on the right is the mussel gonad. So that's where the eggs and the sperm are originally produced. And you can see there's another mussel gonad there on the left, and you can see they look kind of different. This one looks a bit unhappy. It's kind of white and yucky looking. This one just looks a bit healthier. It's nice, it's got this nice golden colour, looks more like the rest of the mussel. The reason the one on the right looks super unhealthy is because it's full of these. So these are taken under a microscope. What I do is chop the mussel open, take little samples, and get these out. And these are trematodes. I call them the dick and balls of the parasite world, because that's what they look like. And these are castrators. So these reproduce asexually, and what they basically do is they fill the mussel gonad. So they completely castrate the mussel, and then for the rest of its life, these mussels are basically trematode factories. So the mussel stays alive for years and years, but instead of producing its own babies, it will now produce trematode babies instead. So this is how the trematode works. You can see it grows in the mussel there, then it's got its dick and balls, which go out of the mussel, go through 2 species of fish, and then the trematode has to go and find another freshwater mussel to complete the life cycle. And because of the circular motion, and because of the trematodes needing to find mussels at that point of the life cycle to actually succeed, it means that these trematodes are actually a good thing, and they provide regulation. And I'll talk you through quickly how this works. So if we have a mussel with trematodes, that stops these mussel babies being produced. But if there's no mussel babies being produced, then there's no adult mussels being produced. And if there's no adult mussels being produced, then there's no host for the trematodes. The trematodes couldn't survive either. And so if there's no trematodes, that means there's more mussels likely to be able to produce babies. And so we go around in this nice regulated circle. So while there will always be some mussels which have trematodes, most of the mussels in the population won't have trematodes. They can still produce babies. So really, what trematodes do is provide regulation, and this allows the coexistence of multiple mussel species. Because if any one species gets too dominant, its trematodes will find it, castrate it lots, and it'll go down. And this works because each mussel species has its own specialist trematode parasites. And just to say, this is true of parasites generally. This is not just a mussel-specific case. In general, parasites are actually really good regulators of populations. They provide a really important role in allowing coexistence of multiple different species. And I should say these trematodes are native. They're a native species. They're just as natural as the mussels are. They're really important. However, invasive species disrupt this. So that's a native mussel there on the left, and then there's an invasive mussel which has come across from Asia there on the right. And it's sort of hard to tell with the scale, but you can see the invasive mussel is a whole lot bigger. The native mussel is quite easily held between the thumb and forefinger. The invasive mussel fills the whole palm. And this invasive mussel is also a viable host for these trematodes. The trematodes can use that invasive mussel too. What this means is in this nice sort of regulated cycle, we have this invasive species coming in, which is another good host for the trematode. So even if its native host goes down, the trematodes can still reproduce lots and lots and basically fill up all the native hosts then and stop them from producing babies. So with this invasive mussel species, we get lots of species or lots of mussels infected with trematodes not producing babies, and only a few native species actually producing their nice mussel babies, which leads to this imbalance of the whole ecosystem. So that's another way in which invasive species, sort of in an unexpected way, by providing an additional host for these trematodes, affect native populations. My final example is about ecosystem function. So as I've told you before, mussels filter the water. This is massively important. And I wanted to know, as part of my PhD, can invasive parasites disrupt this? So for this, I looked at the European bitterling. So this is a fish which is common in Asia and also Europe, as the name suggests, but it's invasive in the UK, so it shouldn't be here. And what I'll tell you now is that, I told you a couple of minutes ago that mussels are parasites on fish. I'll now tell you that this fish is parasites on mussels. And if that doesn't make you think that the natural world is just crazy, then you're wrong. So this is a female bitterling here, and what it will do is it'll swim along, have a good sniff of a mussel to see if it's a mussel that it wants to oviposit in, and you can see it's got this very long ovipositor here, so that will stick that into the mussel and basically inject its eggs directly into the gills of the mussel, and then a male fish will swim along, deposit its sperm over the mussel sucks that in, and then fertilizes the egg. And then the baby fish, the fertilized eggs, turn into baby fish, stay in the mussel for about a month before being released as adult fish. And I wanted to know if this parasitism could affect the way the mussels filter. So what I did is I collected a whole lot of mussels from this river here. Some had these bitterling inside, some didn't. And I carried out this experiment where I basically fed mussels a whole lot of crap. Some of the mussels had parasites, some of them didn't, and I saw how well they filtered with and without the parasites. So this is the most complicated slide I'll show you, but I'll talk you through it. Obviously, you can see I've relabeled the axes. It didn't look in the paper like this. But basically, along this side, we've got the amount of stuff that I fed the mussels, and then up that side, we've got the amount of stuff that the mussels filtered, or the amount that they filtered. And each individual dot there is a mussel. You can see in yellow, those are the mussels that didn't have parasites, and in the grey, those are the mussels that did have the parasites. And what we see here in the mussels that didn't have the parasites, it's basically the more crap I fed the mussels, the more they filtered. This is exactly what we'd expect. This is perfect mussel behaviour. This is exactly what we'd hope to see. And what this means, sort of for the river, is that basically the dirtier a river is, the more filled with rubbish the river is, the harder a mussel will work to clear it. That's exactly what we want. That's perfect. What we see with these bitterling-infected mussels is we see the opposite. And actually, the more crap I fed the mussel, the less it filtered. And this is because, as I said, these bitterling eggs, they develop in the gills of the freshwater mussel. So these deform the gills, and so when you feed the mussels heaps of crap, basically because the gills are deformed, it limits their ability to deal with all these particles. So the more you feed them, the more clogged their gills get. They can't deal with all of this, and so their filtering capacity actually goes down. So this is obviously the opposite of what we would want. With this invasive parasite, the more the river would need to be filtered, the less efficient the mussel actually is. So these parasites really affect the whole ecosystem, not just these individual mussels. So just to ram that home, with no parasites, no invasive parasites, we get these nice clean rivers. With these invasive bitterling, we'll get these dirty rivers. So to summarize what I've told you guys today, I hope I've shown you that invasive species are really interesting in terms of host parasite networks, and they can act both as parasites and through parasites to affect not only native populations, but also whole ecosystems, which could have serious consequences. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions.
Questions?
Question. So with the bitterling infected ones at the start, it looks like when there's less crap to filter, the bitterling infected ones filter better.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'll just go back quickly. I was actually hoping someone would pick up on that. That's probably because we don't know for sure. It's probably oxygen competition. So because the mussel gills, they're used for multiple things. So they're used to get food and filter, but they also use it to uptake oxygen. That's how they get oxygen. And so if there's bitterling in their gills, the bitterling also need oxygen, and so they're competing with the mussel for oxygen. So down here, where there's not much stuff, the gills aren't getting clogged, so we see this elevated response because the mussel is competing with the bitterling for oxygen. It needs more oxygen, so it raises its filtering rate relative to uninfected mussels. So I think that's why we see an elevated response there.
Yes, Anna?
What are some of the main reasons that invasive shellfish or invasive parasites get spread along these river systems?
Yeah, it's mainly human activity. So recreational fisheries, boat traffic, especially things like ballast water. You don't really think about it in terms of freshwater ecosystems, but it is still really common to have ballast moving around and then dropped in different places. But yeah, especially anglers. And people with just small boats who don't clean them properly and then go into one river, go into another river, things can easily tag onto that, get stuck on them, and then fall off somewhere else. So that's probably the key reasons how these things are getting moved around. At the back? It's sort of one of those things, I think, once they're there, the ship has sailed. So to reduce the impact, we need to prevent them from getting there in the first place. Again, because the propagules are so small, and it's really hard to work in underwater environments, especially in rivers and lakes with muddy sediments. You can't clear a population really. If you know that they're there, it's going to be incredibly difficult to go through and find all those invasive mussels. So we really need to stop them from getting there in the first place. So that's why there is quite strong campaigns now about managing boat traffic. There'll be people giving out flyers at different water sites, giving them out to fishers, to recreational boat users, really telling them, how to clean their material properly before moving somewhere else. I think those are the key steps. Once an invasive species in these sorts of environments makes it there, then it's going to be there, and it's incredibly difficult to get them out again. So we need to focus on prevention rather than management. Cool. Thank you very much, everyone.
Are we still okay to eat mussels, by the way? Nah, I wouldn't. Yeah? Okay, I wouldn't. Plus, now that we have figured out, we are the ones who are basically responsible for the whole invasive species thing, and then we also eat them. It's not justified, right? Well, let's move on. Next, we have Maria, and she is also a postdoc research associate, not a PhD student. And Maria psychologizes aliens because she will explain how, for the invasive species, it's a game of blending in with the locals. Or probably not, right? Yeah, okay, yeah. But does this remind you of something to do with Terminators? Brandon? You don't know? Let's see. Shape-shifting robots, psychoanalysis of aliens. It's a bit confusing. Let's give it to Maria and see if she can clarify our doubts. Off to you.
Okay, so thank you so much for the opportunity for being here and for giving this talk. So basically, I will summarize my last job here in the King College, working with invasive species. Basically, I analyzes how important it is to be similar or dissimilar to the resident species for having a success during the invasion. So probably this is the kind of images that we have in our mind when we think in invasive alien species. So in this case, this is a compilation of different alien species from television. So we are quite used to see them, and they are more or less different between them, and also they are more or less different with respect to human species and other species in the earth. But regarding to these differences, have you ever thought how important is being different from resident species for having success during the invasion? Would you say that any of these species would be better for invasion regarding only to their trait? Anyway, so this is what most biologists think. that alien species are. So in this case, they are normal species, they are from the planet Earth, and they are among us. So in this case, the problem of these species is not what they are, but where they are. So probably they have almost no impact in the places where they come from. And the problem is that they are alien because they are in an area that is not native, and they can become invasive because they may displace native species. So in this case, we have different set of species that, for example, the cane toad or the wild pig or the zebra mussel that have become widely famous. So this increase of the alien species has become in the last decade particularly important. We know the alien species since centuries ago, but they are being more and more abundant and frequent in recent years. In fact, they seem not to be saturating this increasing curve, and this trend to increase the abundances of alien species seems to be more or less similar across different taxonomic groups and spatial and different areas. Anyway, we see here that different countries have different problems with alien species. This is the richness, that is the number of alien species in different countries. And in red color, we see that the countries that are more affected are countries in Central Europe, as well as North America and Australia. Apart from the impact that they have in the communities where they may displace native species, they also have economic impact. They may impact like different economic sectors, but mostly they used to impact the agricultural and the health system. Particularly in the case of Europe, they are estimated to cost around $140 billion between 1960 and 2000. So because of this reason, it is particularly important to understand which are the main processes determining the success of these alien invasions. Despite there are a lot of uncertainty on these processes, we still know some of the processes that may determine the success of this invasion. One may be related to the pathogen, as my colleague has explained before. So in this case, for example, the grey squirrel that has been introduced from North America through UK is transmitting a pox virus to the red squirrel, which is the native one in this case. But it may happen as well that the introduced species or the alien species may have a super high rate for fecundity or reproduction, so it will spread super rapidly, as is the case of the rabbit in Australia. But it may happen as well that the introduced species may be quite good at using the local resources in the introduced range. So we know that these alien species are quite important, and among other reasons, they have been, they suppose a challenge for the natural selection theory. And why this is a challenge? This is a challenge because, as we know, the natural selection theory that is known from Darwin said that the species will be progressively adapted to the area where they live. So step by step, the species will be more accurate to survive and reproduce. So how it is possible then that an alien species that has evolved in other place in the world is better than native species? Or the same question in the other way. How is it possible that native species that are adapted to a given area perform worse than a native species, than an introduced species? So among other reasons, it is important to know that despite we have different climates in the world, this climate may repeat in different areas. For example, we have Mediterranean climate in the Mediterranean basin, but as well we have Mediterranean climate in California or Chile or South Africa. So if we have a species that is adapted to survive to Mediterranean climate, probably if you move that species from the Mediterranean basin to California, this species will survive. And this is what we used to call pre-adaptation hypothesis, that the species is pre-adapted to survive to a given place, to a given environment. But it may happen as well that the natural selection is not so good always, and it's not perfect because they act over a regional pool. The regional pool is the set of species that were already located in a given place. So in this case, we have different shapes and colors that will represent different species. And then for these different species that may not be so much, or maybe not so many, or maybe they are not really perfect, we will have an environmental filter that will select those species that are able to survive under this environmental condition. And then from these survival species, we will have that only those that are able to compete and win against the other species will be the one that we will find in the final community. But in other places in the world, we may have different composition from the regional pool with more or less species with different strategies to survive, maybe to the similar environmental condition. And then a different set of species will be selected and may compete with different number of species and with different competitive capacities. So if we have one species from this community that is introduced to this previous community, maybe this species is already adapted to compete, to establish and become abundant in the region because maybe this species was pre-adapted and has similar traits or even has a different strategy to survive to the same condition using different niches, or because this species has previously interacted with other species that may be even better competitors. So regarding to this explanation, is there any pattern or characteristic for the invasive species or the alien species that could help us to predict the success of the invasions? So regarding to this previous explanation, the main driver of community assembly will be, in this case, the environmental filter as well, and the interaction and the biotic interaction. So given this hypothetical community with native species in green and the alien species in orange, we will see that if environmental filtering is the main driver determining the composition, maybe it is better for the community to have wide leaves in this case, because probably having similar traits to those resident species will ensure that you have the traits to survive to this environmental condition, and then the rest of the species that are more dissimilar will disappear. So considering the functional space, that is the space built with the different functional traits, for example, in the x-axis, we may have the seed mass, and in the y-axis, we may have the plant height. We will see that the species tend to be more joined than expected by chance. But and also in case of the phylogenetic tree or the evolutionary tree, we will see that the species tend to be more together because normally there's a correlation between the functional and the phylogenetic space. And then the higher the similarity, the lower success. Because is it better to be similar to the resident species to ensure that you have the trait to survive? But on the other side, it may happen that if you have similar trait to the resident species, and competition is the main driver determining the community composition, you will see that having the same traits may lead you to compete with the resident species, and maybe you can lose this competition. So it is better to be different in this case. And then we will see again that in this case, in the functional space, the species are more separated than expected by chance, and as well that these families are farther from the native species than expected. So then being dissimilar is better for a successful invasion. Already Darwin knew that and noted that regarding to his natural selection theory, it may happen both of the things. At the beginning, he thought that it was better to be similar because this ensured you to have the required trait to survive. But then, after seeing that with a set of data, this data didn't match this expectation, he thought that maybe it was not so good to have the same trait because this species may compete with the native species. And he thought that maybe it was better to be dissimilar to avoid competition. This last is called as well Darwin naturalization hypothesis in honor to Darwin, but at the beginning he thought both ideas. So which of these processes determine alien invasion success? So it depends, which is one of our favorite scientists' responses. So a recent compilation of studies across the globe, that is this paper, analyzed the prevalence of the different hypotheses. In blue, the Darwin naturalization hypothesis, that is related to competition, and in orange, the pre-adaptation hypothesis, that is more related with environmental filtering. And they said that across the globe, all the studies seem to support more or less equally the different hypotheses, and even a third part of the studies support none of the hypotheses. But then when checking a different spatial scale, where the regional may be the spatial scale from England to UK or even broader scales, they see again that there were no really big differences. But at the local scale, they found that there were more environmental filtering or pre-adaptation hypotheses. So we may expect even the opposite, that because these species at this spatial scale may compete because they are so close to other species. And the reason that we think that this may happen, or this pattern may emerge, may be because the spatial scale where more studies tend to analyze the local scale are quite broad. So normally tends to hundreds of meters, and maybe species are in fact still not interacting at this scale. So we try to analyze more tiny spatial scale in a study using a long-term grass experiment, which took place in Minnesota. We used a local scale that was the transit scale, in this case 40 meters. And we also use, in this case, 2700 plot with a tiny scale that it was half a square meter. We found 25 introduced or alien species and 110 native species. And we have different trait values, seed mass, plant height, leaf area, and so on. And with this data, we build this common or multivariate functional space in which we measure these distances between the traits for our functional dissimilarities. We as well characterize the phylogenetic tree and measure the distance between the introduced species and the native species. So again, we analyze the data at both the transit and the plot level. And in the case of the scale phylogenetic distance, what we found is that there's a negative trend. And it seems that then it was bad to be dissimilar to the native species. That means it was better to be closely related to native species. That means that probably some families tend to be more successful in the invasion. But on the other side, we see that in case of the functional distance, the pattern may change depending on the spatial scale. And in this case, in the transit level, the trend tends to be the same. And in this case, it seems that it was worse to be dissimilar than being similar. That means that it was better to have similar traits to the resident species. For example, for having the same traits that are allowed to survive to this environmental condition. But when changing to the functional, to the plot level, what we see in this case is that a slight trend, positive trend, and this may mean that the species at this scale where the species may interact are better to be dissimilar to avoid competition. So using a more simple example, probably, if we check at this spatial scale humans, different human individuals, we will see that despite the variety of individuals, they tend to see pretty similar because they have 2 arms, 2 legs, so normal humans. And if you add a new individual, probably it will be similar, and then you will find that being similar to the rest of individuals ensures that you will be successful in the invasion. But if we introduce a new, or if we look at local scale, we will see the diversity of the individuals, and in this case, with this resolution, we will see that this individual is not so similar to the rest. And particularly for using a different niche than the rest, it will be more successful. So finally, for summarizing, if we have to give advice to alien species to conquer the Earth, or if we have to give advice to Elon Musk to invade any other planet, we have to say that it is important to be similar enough to the resident species to ensure that you have the trait to survive to the environmental condition in the new planet, but try not to be so similar that you can locally compete for resources for us with the resident species and maybe lose this competition. So that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria, for that really insightful talk. We now open up the floor to questions. Questions, anyone? Right at the back.
Can I ask for both?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I'm not a biologist or ecologist, so apologies for the ignorant question, but how do you define invasive and native? Is it purely like a social, spatial temporal judgment, or is there some sort of ecological enclosure outlet as an issue?
Yeah.
So that's a good question because, in fact, species are always moving. But the fact with these invasive species is that they have recently been moved, and they probably have been moved in the last decade and because of human action, so it's quite easy to differentiate them. And in case of differentiate between alien and invasive, it depends on the amount of the species or the abundances normally, and this is more related to human concept.
So, bearing that in mind, is there a timescale over which a sort of naturalization can occur for an invasive species to then be accepted as a native species?
Yeah, I think that this has to do again with the assumption of the abundances and how bad the species is for human. But I wouldn't say that there's a exact amount of time for considering the species as naturalized. But probably I would say that maybe for centuries or more, probably here, Olea europaea, that is the olive, some people would say that it's introduced, some people would say that it's naturalized. And it depends on the impact that it has and the long time that it has been, but no less than centuries probably.
Yeah.
Right. So when you say that they're bad for humans, is that in terms of the water filtering and ecosystems not being able to perform their functions anymore? Or is that more of a direct connection?
Oh, okay. So you refer to the slide with the humans?
No, you were just saying, oh, it depends on their impact and how bad they are for humans. So how does that, is that direct or indirect?
Yeah, so I think that is mostly direct, or the impact that they even have directly to biodiversity, not only for humans. So if we see that they are becoming more abundant than the native species and they are changing the community composition, we will see that they are invasive and so bad. But just for saying that they are alien, this is enough with come from another region that is not the region where they are expected to be.
Will climate change see the invasive species happening much more often?
Yeah, probably. Depending on the place, they may because the environmental conditions are changing. And one important thing about alien species is that we have propagule pressure. That is the number of species that arrive at a place. But these species, more of them normally are not able to establish and succeed. But probably with the change of the environmental condition, more of these total amount of species that arrive to a place may be able to survive. So it depends on the species requirement, but maybe, yes, some species will become more abundant.
I have a question. So if similarity or dissimilarity can determine the success, can it also affect their failures? So for example, if an event were to affect the native species, that wipes them out. Does being too similar or too different help them stand? Maybe mitigate this, or will they just go down with it as well?
Yeah, it works on the opposite side as well. If you are too similar, maybe it's bad. As I said, it depends on the context. If you are too similar at local scale, probably is going to be a problem for you to survive. Yeah.
Any other questions? If not, round of applause for Maria.
For a recap, previously on the biological invaders.
Ooh. We've seen how parasitic mechanisms work, how invasions disrupt ecosystem services, scary stuff. We've seen how aliens then compete with natives, and they have to then strike a balance between standing out or blending in. But now, is anyone worried about the earthly aliens yet? Anyone worried after hearing everything we've just heard? Yes. Whoa, so scary. So you're not alone. Totally, you're not alone, because it is government protocol across the world to eradicate invasions. Government protocol to preempt invasions by eradicating populations before they can take root. And this is done on the basis of environmental concerns, environmental impacts, prevent this from happening. So what does a zero-tolerance approach towards non-native species mean for us as a society? Are we focusing too much on the distinctions between the us and the them?
Or maybe we are not. I don't know. But the question is, can this distinction be damaging? And to understand if this distinction is even damaging, we are going to welcome Phil for his philosophy. He is a professor of urban studies, and he's going to tell us some short stories, right, Phil? Yeah, about alien relationships that lead to our own alienations from Europe. Anyone want to guess what we are talking about? That was an easy guess. Phil, all over to you.
Oh, gone too far already. Okay, so you've had the science. I'm afraid now you get the non-science, you get the cultural politics. So, good. Welcome to Pint of Cultural Politics. It's not quite as catchy, is it? Look, I don't know a lot about environmental science or ecology, but I do know that even the most scientific ecologists would probably say that when you talk about invaders and invasion, there's a kind of a spectrum there. You're looking at things which appear to, in some senses, be ecologically damaging and harmful for the environment. And we've already heard earlier on, we've heard about knotweed, and very few people have got anything good to say about knotweed. But on the other hand, you've got some invaders who, you know, the harms they do seem to be quite disputed. And one example I could throw out here, I don't know many, but one is the Turkey oak. And the Turkey oak, in many ways, seems to be vilified because it's aesthetically challenging the kind of British landscape. We're used to the nice English oak. The Turkey oak is still kind of like provides certain ecosystem services, but people don't seem to like it because it outcompetes the English oak. And we love the shape of the English oak, particularly if we're the Tory party, because it's a symbol of the Tory party, right? So we've got to be a bit suspicious when people start talking about invasive species. Yeah, they cover a real kind of spectrum. So I want to just briefly explore that kind of spectrum here with reference to my new book coming out in June. I may mention it a few times. Oh look, some flyers. My new book, Borderlands, which is a kind of geological, political, kind of ecological examination and reading of the Kent coast. Not really about Kent, though. It's about the edge of England. It's about the end of the world and everything, really. So hopefully there's some good stuff in there. I'm not sure. So it's a landscape. Kent, some of you from Kent, no, you mainly look sane, well-balanced individuals. So you're not from Kent, you're from other places, that's fine. But Kent you probably know through representations and discourses like this. Sorry, this is a bit small, but it's been hardly out of the news in the last 5 years or so. So the two representations here, the first one there, I guess people know, can see what that is just about. I tried to get there to take some photographs myself, but security were like, just back off. And this is the back of an industrial park at Dover. There's a kind of KFC, and if you crawl through the hedge, you can probably get a little glimpse of all the dinghies that have been rounded up by Border Patrol and put into a secure unit there at the edge of Dover. And this is one of the few runways in the UK that can take an A380 plane. That's Manston Airport, which has not been used commercially or otherwise for about 10 years. But when the French decided to close the border because of the A117 variant of COVID, the Kent variant, as it became known, a badge of pride. You can tell I'm from Kent, can't you? We've given nothing to the world apart from the COVID that up your Christmas 2 years ago. And so Manston Airport became a huge lorry park for foreign lorry drivers wanting to get back home for Christmas, reliant upon people passing boxes of food through the fence in really kind of depressing scenes. So Kent has kind of been shaped in the last 3 years by that kind of anxiety about migration, by Brexit, and by kind of COVID nationalism, as we might call it, you know, tit for tat, where the French and British have kind of fussed about border controls and made a right mess of everything for people living on both sides of the border. And as you can kind of get to, I'm kind of talking here about discourses of blockage and filth, and hence now I think Kent is pretty well known as the toilet of England to a lot of people. And I can say that to say, because I'm from Kent, and I'm from Ashford, which is kind of the biggest hole you can imagine. So, yeah, Kent. It's about Kent, but it's about wider stuff as well. But historically, Kent was known as the Garden of England. Now, that's a really kind of interesting discourse. Yes, there was some market gardening there, but I think it's an imaginative kind of representation. If you want to talk about the Garden of England, you could talk about Herefordshire, you could talk about market gardening in Lincolnshire. But Kent is kind of important because it's between London and those nasty foreign folks, yeah? So maintaining that kind of image of a kind of a green bufferland between the metropolitan centre and the elite, that's us, and the foreigners over there has been really important, particularly in times of war when fighting for the green fields of England was very much projected onto this kind of landscape of Kent. And since the Second World War in particular, you know, the Battle of Britain was fought over the skies of Kent in many ways. It's become kind of part of our national discourse. The White Cliffs of Dover, Dover Castle, Hellfire Corner are things that most British people are kind of taught as part of a patriotic English history. Since that time, every time there's been a kind of the merest inkling that somehow the continent is getting closer to England, the people of Kent get very anxious about invasions, and they begin to invoke this kind of language of aliens and invaders, and there's a particular playing out of rhetoric about the border and the threat to the border. And I'm just going to very quickly then offer 3 stories, and in some senses they're fictions, because I haven't actually written them up. They're not in the book. This is all for free, this is good stuff. This is all good stuff, but it is made up. So I want to look at 3 different instances where there have been quite pronounced, I think, invasion metaphor around the coast of Kent. And these go back across the latter years of the 20th century into the 21st, and mainly my lifetime. So the first one is about the Colorado Beetle. What do we know about the Colorado Beetle? Well, I don't actually know much about the Colorado Beetle, apart from its eggs, its larvae, and adults are mainly associated with potato plants, and it strips those potato plants really quickly. Now, when we were in the EU, there are some very strict screening protocols around the importation of potato crops and seeds. But there's still been that kind of quite pronounced fear that Colorado beetles might come into the UK through imported seed stocks or soil or by other means. And those kind of fears have been quite pronounced around the coast of Kent. And they become quite newsworthy. I think the first Colorado plantation was found in the UK about 1902, and then there wasn't really much action until 1947, when suddenly a number of colonies were found on the coast of Kent. And in 1947, there were 47 separate identifications of colonies around the UK, and 33 of them were in Kent. So you began to see these adverts, police notices, there were rewards given for members of the public and kids who would find Colorado beetles, take them into the police, and if they will be identified as Colorado beetles, you get your 5-shilling reward. And then the Department of Farming and Fisheries would go round to the farm where they'd been found, and they would douse all the crops in lead arsenate or DDT. And in 1947 alone, 12,000 hectares of potato crops in Kent were laced with this very heavy-duty pesticide. And there are still very clear protocols even today that DEFRA have, even if you run an organic farm. If they find Colorado beetles, boom, in comes that really heavy-duty pesticides. So when we're thinking about Colorado beetles, in my lifetime, I remember these. In the 1970s, there was a real concern that re-emerged about Colorado beetles in England, and a lot of this was played out on the Kent coast. And this was in 1976. Anybody know what happened in 1976, which might have promoted a kind of anxiety about Colorado beetles in Britain? Heatwave, yeah, long hot summer. So by the drinking fountains in my junior school, I mean, I wasn't born then, but anyway, in 1976, you would get signs at the drinking fountains, save water and look for the Colorado beetle. So from that point, we were really kind of enrolled and enmeshed in this kind of surveillance kind of assemblage. I, as a young child, was being encouraged to walk at the fields and look for these alien invaders, to be vigilant about the threat from overseas. Yeah, and this in the context of kind of 70s, where we were told that everything was risky and dangerous. You know, the farms were going to kill us. You know, nuclear power, everything was dangerous. So I think from that age, it kind of drilled into us in Kent was this idea that these nasty things came from overseas, were a threat to our biosecurity, and that we needed to be ever vigilant for them. What was I going to talk about next? Oh, it's my childhood, isn't it? 10 years later, I'm still living in Kent. I haven't quite managed to get into the University of Liverpool because I didn't get my grades. So I had to think again. I was stuck in Kent for a year before I didn't make it into Liverpool. They still didn't want me. But I'm not bitter. I'm not going to mention it again. Channel Tunnel. So they're starting to build the Channel Tunnel, and the Channel Tunnel link through my village where I grew up with my parents. And it's quite interesting. There was a lot. You'd think that people in Kent, because will be really pleased that there's this injection of EU money and infrastructure coming in. But surprise, surprise, the people of Kent are absolutely furious about the Channel Tunnel link road coming through the green and pleasant land. There's a lot of interesting metaphors being tossed around. One of them is the idea that this is going to rape the countryside. You know, this is a really strange metaphor where the Garden of England is seen as this kind of vulnerable female, and the men of Kent need to protect her from this alien incursion. So it is that, they're using that metaphor. You look back and it's quite disturbing in many ways. But associated with that, the Channel Tunnel itself was seen to be something that would bring, new problems through the Channel Tunnel. Now, in the 19th century, they abandoned the Channel Tunnel because of military concerns and myths about those nasty French invading through the tunnel. By the 20th century, the fears are much more, well, you think that it might be about terrorism or migration, but it's not. In the 1980s, it was all about rabies. And rabies is, of course, a very nasty thing indeed, and it's particularly disturbing, I think, in Britain, because we're a nation of animal lovers, or pet lovers, I should say. Yeah, cuddly cats and dogs, and the idea that you could be bitten by a family dog and give them rabies and end up dying was really, again, one of those things that kind of haunted, I think, younger generations in the 60s and 70s, when we're getting this all the time. Irrespective of the fact, I think there's been one rabies death in the UK since 1902, and that was a conservationist from Norfolk who decided to kiss a bat or something like that. So the fears of rabies are really overstated, but I think it's used as kind of a lot of the fears that Kentish people had about overseas and foreign influences were sublimated to that level. It was the rabid dog, was the real anxiety that people had. So this was much discussed in the media. It was discussed in Parliament on very many occasions as well, to the extent that foreign news coverage, if you look at it in the 1980s, seems to think we're absolutely obsessed with rabies to the point of massive over-precaution. Now, Eurotunnel, when they started on their plans for the Channel Tunnel in the 1980s, said, well, look, this is absolutely stupid because, you're talking about 22k of cold, foodless tunnel. No animals are going to get through it. And equally, if people are going to smuggle animals into the UK, they might as well do it by air or by ferry or hovercraft, a million different ways. The Channel Tunnel doesn't really have any fears associated with it. But that wasn't good enough for a lot of the politicians who absolutely wanted cast iron guarantees you wouldn't get rabid rats crawling through the Channel Tunnel. And to this day, you've still got this really complex assemblage of electronic barriers, ditches and fences at the end of all three of the Channel Tunnels. There are two main ones and then there's a service tunnel in the middle, to ensure that any rats or animals that try and come through the Channel Tunnel are nicely electrocuted. And this is all politically infused as well. This is under the Tory government in the 1980s, Labour saying, well, in the 1970s we didn't have any rabies in this country, we looked after it effectively. And then the Tories saying, well, I hesitate to say there's any connection between the last Labour government and rabies. There are precautions there. And this one, a Labour member of the House of Lords, has the noble Baroness, a Tory, have any evidence these animals wish to enter the United Kingdom? Baroness Trumpington, a Tory, my lords, everyone wishes to enter the United Kingdom. Yeah? So another kind of interesting kind of Tory discourse about invasion and the need to deflect that invasion from overseas. So when I'm growing up, I'm sort of growing up now, I've started doing research and gradually my urban research has drawn me back to these kind of fears about the ecological and invasive other. So I've been doing some research on oysters in Whitstable, which is on the North Kent coast. And in that research about oysters, I've been exploring the fact that Whitstable has got a town beach. And that beach is owned by the Whitstable Oyster Fisheries Company, which 1793 onwards has had exclusive ownership of that beach because it's allowed to cultivate and look after the native oyster population. And if you ever go down to Whitstable, it's one of the few places in the UK that's still known for the, quote, native oysters, which are legendary for their kind of succulence and their taste, and they have protected European designation as well as a foodstuff, a protected foodstuff. But what's been happening in Whitstable is a number of local residents have been protesting against the Whitstable Oyster Fishery Company and their ownership of the beach, because they're really concerned that they've started not just to kind of dredge up the oysters from the Kentish beds offshore, and that's a traditional way of cultivating oysters, with line and pole and dredging and all the rest of it, and netting. They're moving now instead to growing them as they do, shock horror, in France on the Brittany coast, by using trestles. So what you have now assembled off the coast of Whitstable, if ever you go down there, the Whitstable Oyster Festival is normally in July. If you go down there in July, you will see something like 36,000 bags, plastic mesh bags, of oysters being cultivated on the foreshore on unsightly metal racks. So there's been a kind of a discourse, a kind of an opposition to this from local people. And a lot of this is just about the industrialisation of the foreshore, and like they don't want to look out this kind of ugly industrial production. They want to see the old-fashioned oyster fishermen in their smocks and they're going out in their boats. And it's not like that anymore. It's, high-vis vest, day glow people going out on their quad bikes, turning over mesh bags every morning. But what we do see in some of the kind of opposition, I've followed this for a number of planning inquiries, is people opposing the development of the growing of invasive Pacific oysters, because rather than trying to grow natives, what they're doing now is importing French Pacific oysters, particularly in the larvae stage, then growing them on in a hatchery down the coast at Reculver. Then they're taking them to Whitstable to grow in the bags. And people don't like this. People from the Whitstable Beach campaign arguing that this is a European alien invasive species. The Pacific oyster is potentially damaging. They're blamed in various places for the fact that there was a herpes outbreak a few years ago that rendered all of the North Kent oyster population inedible. And there's also concerns here that the Pacific oyster is now outcompeted the native, and also that it's drifting out of these mesh bags in larval form and drifting along the coast, depositing itself on coral chalk substrate, where it seems to be outcompeting and killing off those lovely mussels with all their sexy glands that we heard about earlier, which I found a little bit disturbing. So there's a whole bunch of people now. Natural England have got a group of people now who are going up and down the coast, going out to the Isle of Thanet in particular, where there are large numbers, hundreds of thousands, of these non-native Pacific oysters on the coast. And they go along and basically they take hammers, they smash the shells of the non-native oysters, smash the shells, and then the seagulls come down, eat the oysters, and that deals with the problem. And what I really like about that is the name of that group, because if you've got a problem, who are you going to call? Coastbusters. I like that. So Coastbusters are out there. So what was this all about? I had a conclusion. Let me find a conclusion. I can't remember. Okay, what I'm not suggesting here is that every single person... Is that my book again? Did I mention that? Wow, who put that there? Yeah, I'm not suggesting here that anybody who goes along the coast bashing a native oyster or protesting about Pacific oysters coming in is some sort of Brexit voting xenophobe. But we're living in times where there seems to be obviously clear anxieties about the borders of this country, questions of identity and belonging at the edge of England. And I think we've lived in a time, we remember that the key Leave argument was that the white working class was suffering under the burden of mass immigration. The EU membership was restricting Britain's ability to monitor and control its border. And I think there are some clear connections to be drawn about invasive species crossing the border and wider concerns about boundary crossing. And okay, that's a little bit loose and broad, and you can take me apart on some of the details there, particularly when we think about rabies and whether we want rabies in the country or whether we want Colorado beetles. But in all of this, what I'm arguing is that really I think we need to be really careful when we draw connection, when we draw distinction between invaders and natives, because sometimes I think we need to question that really seriously and carefully because otherwise we can easily lapse into kind of xenophobic thinking and forms of racism. And I think that's it, apart from to mention there's this book, and it's coming out. Don't turn off in 5 minutes. I want that picture up there. I want that there all night. And yeah, none of my books have ever sold before. This isn't going to, but especially after tonight, all the proceeds of this book, all my royalty goes to the Kent Refugee Action Network. So that's why I'm kind of promoting it. It's not that I make any money from it. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. And yeah, so that was a really insightful talk. Mind blown. Where do we begin? Any questions from the audience? Right at the back.
First of all, I would contend that Ashford actually isn't the because I was born, well, I was raised in Orpington.
Oh, yeah. Here we go.
Orpington is worse simply because we do Joe Johnson as our MP and has done for the past 10 years. I would say, like, first of all, I totally agree. I think the idea of exclusionary nationalism in talking about invaders, like this kind of politicalization of invasive species, is relevant and true. But I would actually contend that rather than talking to scientists about needing to be careful with the language they use, it's more about the media's interpretation. So, you know, invasive versus native, in a scientific sense, is actually really useful. You know, to be blunt, yeah, French oysters give English oysters herpes is hilarious, and no one denying it. But I also think it's important to bear in mind that the problem isn't so much the science, which is factually kind of correct most of the time. Sometimes. Yeah. But the problem is the politicians and media who take it into a big old spin of, hey, you know what? French oysters are going to give you unlike English oysters herpes. And I think I don't know. I've done that horrible thing where I meant to ask a question and turned it to a point and I never do that. But I just thought that was, I'm going to stop talking. So, yeah.
It's a very good point. Yeah, no, I agree, and I'm not the only person making this argument anyway. I mean, eco-nationalism, eco-anxiety is not fueled necessarily by science. It's that kind of, as I said, it's that entangling of scientific and cultural discourse. And, you know, in particular, people have written in the run-up to Brexit, suddenly we kind of got more of these stories suddenly going round. And rather than kind of looking at the science, you get all these absurd stories about, I don't know, the giant European dormouse, the Euromoth, stink bugs from Europe. You know, as if all of the things that are bad about nature are coming from overseas. Really bizarre. And when I get to something like the oyster thing, yeah, the science is very disputed. And it's difficult to talk about it in the sense that it will take me a long time to go through it and I don't understand all of it. Because it's not well understood. Because the impact of non-native oysters on native oyster populations is highly variable depending on where you look. Somewhere non-native oysters can help increase the population of native oysters by providing more substrate, by doing certain things in terms of filtering the water. It's a really complicated story. When we look at someone like Whitstable, there's all sorts of things about growing oysters in sacks as well, which make the whole story really complicated in terms of sedimentation, nutrient balance, and all things like that, which, again, are not well understood. And having got to a lot of the planning cases, I began to realise how easy it was for particular groups to persuade, you know, planning authorities, or local government about this is what's going to happen because I read this one paper from 1974 written in this particular context and ignoring a whole wider body of science. And there's not a lot of kind of meta-reviews of that good scientific data to sometimes outweigh those kind of very simple public discourses. So good point. Yeah.
I just sort of maybe want to contend that point a little bit and maybe bring in the ecologists as well. Perhaps I would argue that invasive and native aren't necessarily strictly scientific or positivist terms because from the discussions, or what I've interpreted is dependent on human variants and there aren't necessarily fixed timescales that can depend when invasive species becomes a native species. So what would your response be to saying that those categories aren't necessarily strictly scientific, but perhaps socio-scientific or socio-political?
Yeah. I don't know if I can really answer that beyond the fact that does an oyster know if it's a native or not? I mean, it requires
We're just framing it around the
Yeah.
human perception of nature.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I don't see how we can have those categories without, bringing in human constructs of what is native and invasive. And we have climate change and all the rest of it affecting kind of water quality, water temperature, and all the rest of it. I mean, an oyster feels at home. Whether it knows it's native or, is a wider question about kind of sentience and all the rest of it. I think I'm agreeing with you in a bad way.
We've got time for one last question at the back.
I was just wondering, to what extent, if at all, do you see notions of empire feeding into the attitudes you see in Kent and the phenomenon you're examining?
Oh, attitudes to empire. That's good. I feel I should have a good answer to that. I think there's certainly a lot there. The cover of my book has got 3 lions on, yeah? And if we walk like 800 metres that way, there are some lions who look proud and us clearly symbols of empire. This is by an artist from Kent, Patrick de Carres Taylor. And these are kind of emaciated lions that he sculpted and put on the foreshore here at Dover, in front of the White Cliffs. He then moved them all up to here at Parliament. So if you go online, you can find those images. So that's a kind of commentary exactly on that idea of kind of empire and post-colonial decline, really, which connects to kind of, why did people vote for Brexit? All sorts of different reasons, but partly it's to do with decline of empire. The other thing I was going to say there is, even going back there, this isn't necessarily new. We go back to the 1980s. Rats coming through the Channel Tunnel. That's kind of a post-colonial kind of boomerang as well of a sort, because I think the post-colonial imagination would say, oh no, rats and plague and disease, that's the colonies. That's what we went overseas to cure, to cleanse. And now it's coming back. We're allowing it back in. There was certainly a lot of that kind of, and that kind of whole kind of body of kind of racism that underpins that as well. I think all of that is going on, but you'd have to read the book.